Greetings, traveler of hours. I am the Watcher. Before we drift into the past, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? I read every note before I rest. Settle now. Let the room around you grow soft at the edges, the way a field turns to velvet when evening gathers. I am standing upon a low hill where the grass remembers older footsteps. Below me, a village mends itself by lamplight. Smoke lifts in patient threads, a bell counts the last breaths of daylight, and somewhere a cart's old axle gives a sleepy sigh. The paths are half forgotten, then found again. Hedges lean in, curious, as if to hear your own breathing from across the miles. I have watched the world in times of thunder and in hours of hush, and tonight I choose hush. The air tastes of damp earth and wood smoke. A single bird finishes its final note and leaves the rest of the song to silence. This is a good silence, a healing one, the kind that collects the day's scattered thoughts and lays them down like folded cloth. If my voice brings you comfort, you may choose to follow me and drift beside me through the ages. There is no hurry here. We will move as the moon does, unhurried and sure, letting the old paths rise to meet our feet. I will show you what I have seen in the years after the great dying, when the fields breathed differently and the houses learned new names for hope. We will walk slow lanes and quiet cloisters, markets where the clink of coin sounds like rain on slate, kitchens where broth remembers the hands that stirred it, and gardens where rosemary and you keep counsel with the wind. Breathe with me, long and low. Unfasten the day. Let its buckles and clasps fall into the basket by your bed, and with them the noise that pretends to be important. Here, in this gentle dusk, memory and fable make a soft treaty. I will not startle you. I will not hurry you. I will keep a candle cupped in both hands and speak in a tone fit for sleep. When you are ready, rest your thoughts against mine. The hill waits, the lanes wait, the centuries wait. We will begin in a field where nettles grew tall enough to hide a gate, and where the first returning footsteps learned the new sound of the earth. And as we wander, know that your place and your hour travel with us, stitched quietly into the story like a secret lining. Close your eyes if you wish. The night will keep us. I walk at the pace of dusk, where paths remember feet but no longer insist upon them. The hedges bow over me like slow waves grown still. In the hollows between fields, I find the hamlets that loosen their grip on breath and sound. Doors lean inward as if listening. Windows are blank with the dust of forgotten glances. Nettles keep their own counsel where once a doorstep shone with lye and morning water, and the threshold blessed each returning boot. I pause at one cottage whose thatch has caved like a tired chest. The rafters show their ribs. The hearth is a black mouth slowly eating its last ember of soot. I can still feel the things that used to be here, the threadbare bench warm from a back grown old at its same place, the wooden spoon that always knew the same bowl, the way the cat circled, then took its chosen corner of the sun. A shawl of cobweb stretches between two pegs, and even that has the gentleness of habit. Silence gathers not as a threat but as a quilt, heavy and kind. Birds have learned the open roofs and dropped their seeds where loaf and laughter once rose. Mice script their tiny glosses across the floor of broken rushes. In the garden, the old herbs have gone half wild. Sage thick as a whisper, thyme in a faded braid, tansy campaigning in bright buttons. A rosemary bush remembers someone's careful hand and keeps the shape of it still, like the ghost of a blessing. When the great illness passed, the absent left their share to the earth. It accepted without triumph. Fallow spreads like a sigh. The field forgets its furrows, then dreams new ones. I hear in that drowse the first returning steps, the slow testing of the latch by a cousin or a neighbor, the careful opening of a chest to see what remains, the sorting of keepsakes from what the mice have claimed. There is tenderness in the way people touch what is left behind. They handle a broken cup as if it might still pour warmth. They smooth a coverlet with the back of the hand as though to soothe a sleeper waking late. And then comes the choosing. Which homes shall be mended? Which walls folded into tomorrow's stone fence? Which gardens coaxed back into bread? In such choosing, the living become gardeners of their own luck. They pull the nettles, not all at once, but steadily, as if unwinding a long, prickly sentence. They lift fallen thatch, rehang a door, nail a shutter that will blink warmly at dusk. A child runs through the lane and startles a flush of doves from a roof. His laughter is the first bell the village has heard in a vigil of seasons. There are fewer shoulders for the load, and so each shoulder learns its worth. The miller listens more kindly to the widow's measure. The reeve's voice softens. His tally stick finds it can count mercies as well as dues. Where a lord steward once barked, he now bargains, and the silver that changes hands feels like a gentle vote. Bright tokens that say, we will mend, but we will mend together and on fairer terms. Work takes on a deeper shade of rest. The pause for bread grows longer. The talk by the furrow warms like soup. At the edge of one empty hamlet, I stand beneath an ash tree that has watched the whole forgetting. The bark is furrowed with patient wisdom. I lay a palm to it and sense the slow commerce between root and rain. The tree has been a witness without judgment. It lent its shade to grief and now lends the same to hope. Nearby, a new hearth is kindled in an old shell of a cottage, and a face bends to it, cupping the flame, teaching it to live. The small roar that follows is not loud. It is a low promise kept. Night deepens, and in its kind darkness the abandoned houses seem less like failures and more like pages left blank for a deliberate reason. The survivors will write carefully upon them. Fewer words, wider margins, simpler lines. The lanes that once echoed with the press of many now carry the measured tread of the few, and each step sounds like a seed settling into its place. I cross the green, where a maypole leans from the weight of last year's weather. No ribbons yet, but the air holds a memory of circles, of hands linked, of gentle stomps that woke the earth with joy. The emptiness is not absolute. It is a bowl awaiting bread. It is a quiet ready to be sung into. Beyond the cottages, the church door stands open. A candle burns with the steady intent of someone who will come back. The nave is cool as a cave. It smells of old wood, cold stone, and the faint sweetness of beeswax. On a pew someone has left a sprig of yew, green against the grain. It is not an ornament. It is a message. We remember, and in remembering, we continue. I leave the hamlet as I found it, only now I carry the small warmth of its kindlings within me. When the wind lifts, it does not moan. It tidies. It clears paths in the grass where the returning will walk. It smooths the fur of a barn cat who has taken the whole parish for its own. It combs the sky of cloud, leaving the pale, lanterned face of the moon set just so, as if to bless the roofs that remain and the hands that will roof them again. The earth is learning how to be lightly held. The people are learning how to hold it. Between them, a new village begins, half memory, half seed, all quiet courage. I turn toward the fields, where the borders are loosening and the hedgerows swell like green chords ready to be played. Out beyond the last cottages, the land has taken a deeper breath. Where plows paused and oxen were led home to empty yokes, grasses rose with a slow astonishment. A thin thread of wood crept from the far copse, and then another. Hawthorn stitched hedges thicker. Blackthorn set its small, wicked guardians along the boundary of the old strips. I move through this mild reclaiming and hear its music. The thrum of bees rediscovering a kingdom of clover, the soft cracking of last year's husks, the unhurried scroll of bramble writing itself upon the world. The fields are not rebelling. They are remembering a different grammar. Fallow speaks in low syllables, the dropped seed that wakes, the fern that kneels and then unfurls like a blessing. Poppies mark the furrows that used to be, as if underlining an old sentence to honor its sense even as a new line begins. In the wetter corners, willow drinks deeply and puts up wands as quick as thoughts. Along the ditches, mint creeps with polite insistence, and even the mud smells like a cupboard opened after a long absence to find something sweet still waiting there. With fewer hands to drive them away, the creatures have lengthened their stride. Deer track the lanes at dawn, writing their delicate alphabets in the dust. A boar, the color of old ale, rubs his shoulder against an oak until the bark takes on his story. Hares sit up like little monks, attentive to a sermon of wind. At night, owls weigh the air and make the kind of sound that mends a frayed silence. None of them seem triumphant. They are cautious guests at a table set again after sorrow. They know the people will return. They leave room. When the plow does come back, it comes with new respect. The furrows bite a little deeper, drawn by teams that now command better care. A man pauses, checks the harness, gives a scratch to a patient muzzle. He speaks not loudly, not sharply, but with that soft authority learned from loss. The soil answers. It breaks into fine crumbs, like bread brought to table by a careful hand. Sowing happens with a steadier gesture, and seed is not flung but placed, as if each grain were a small, sleeping hope that prefers to be tucked in. Rights to the wild places become suddenly dear. The word common takes on the glow of a fire seen across fields at night. Shared, sustaining, quietly beloved. Villagers meet by a coppice and mark trees to be cut in turn, not hacked down in one hungry week. They agree on pannage for the pigs under the oaks, on the number of bundles each household may gather from the hedge. If a lord's man frowns, he is met with open, even voices, the kind that do not shout but do not bend too far. Law learns to listen to custom and finds it is older, steadier, kinder. There is more meat in the pot. Not gluttony, not excess, but an ease that had been a rumor returns to the bowl. Milk is richer. Butter holds its shape in warmer rooms. Cheese ripens in the cool backs of cottages. Each will a mild moon that lifts a family's fortunes through winter. And with better fare comes a gentler pace of work. Midday stretches. The water jug is passed. Someone tells a story, not a heroic one, but the sort that nests in the ear and later becomes part of a dream. On the margins of these wilding acres, new crafts awake. A girl twists flax between damp fingers and hums. A boy watches his grandmother card wool until it floats like weather, then learns to tease a thread from it as steady as breath. Hurdles are woven beneath the ash, their rhythm a soft percussion that carries down the lane. Tools are mended instead of scolded. Iron is coaxed back to shine at the smithy where the bellows sigh like an old dog content to be useful. I linger where the meadow meets the brook. The water, less troubled by sluices of late, runs with a contented murmur. At its edges, meadowsweet leans in, and kingcups burn with patient gold. I see footprints where someone came to wash linen, bent, wrung, then draped upon a willow's arm. The cloth drips like quiet rain. In the wake of disaster, cleanliness becomes a form of prayer. Hands rinsed, floors scoured, herbs hung in doorways. It is not fear that compels this care, but tenderness. The wish to keep the living cherished and the lost honored by a tidier world. Even the sky seems to have softened its policy. Weather strolls instead of storms. Rains come in honest measures. When lightning walks the ridges, it does so like a dignitary, not a tyrant. And when the day clears, the air shows a simple blue you can trust. In that constancy, courage takes root. Children are allowed to wander farther, to taste the wild strawberries that colonize the old ridge and furrow, to come home pink-mouthed and sleepy with sun. The people learn from the acres that have gone half untamed, that not everything must be trimmed to a line, that edges hold sweetness, that the world, when left a little alone, remembers how to be generous. Hedges thicken, and with them privacy acquires a fragrance, hawthorn, honey, a suggestion of apples later in the year. Courts of birds convene inside that green lace, and their verdicts favor the unhurried. I kneel and press my fingers into the soil, which crumbles and then holds, which keeps the shape of my hand and then restores itself. The earth forgives, not quickly, but without grudge. It forgives in the way of things that are older than grief and acquainted with its whole calendar. As I rise, I hear the distant call of a horn from the manor. More invitation than command. Men and women drift toward it at their own pace, bringing baskets, bringing news, bringing the kind of silence that sits comfortably among words. The acres are wilding, yes, but they are also listening. They are leaning toward a future in which the plow will draw a truer line. The hedge will harbor more birds. The brook will laugh without debt. And supper will be enough even on ordinary days. I turn with them toward the settlement, where bargains and bread will be weighed in a new balance. The path under my feet is friendly. It remembers me. It remembers you. and it is leading us gently to the place where hands and silver begin their quiet conversation. The road narrows where it slips between hedges heavy with hawthorn. I keep the pace of a cart that has no need to hurry, wheels arranging the dust into quiet spirals. Ahead, a green spreads like a folded cloak. At its edge, a few folk gather as if to listen not merely to one another but to the wind's counsel as well. They stand with the newly learned ease of those who know their worth can be spoken softly and still be heard. Once, the Lord Steward would have read the day to them like a list of chores pinned to the sky. Today he weighs his words in his palm before letting them go. There are fewer shoulders, yes, yet each shoulder is broader in the ledger of necessity. The steward watches hands as one might watch the season, counting calluses the way one counts clouds, measuring what the sky will give and what must be asked for. A plow needs a team, a harvest needs a rhythm, and both now require consent. I hear the first new bargains formed with care, syllable to syllable, the way a mason tests each stone's fit. Wages are mentioned not as a mercy but as an acknowledgement, as plain and right as salt upon a table. Coin passes between palm and palm with a mild weight that neither shames nor boasts. It is a silver vow to meet again at dawn, to turn the furrow true, to heap the sheaves into honest stacks. The word no appears in these exchanges, not brazen, never rude, simply present. The dignity of choosing when a body is worn and when it will serve. Some laws awake and rub their eyes, surprised by this gentler arithmetic. Edicts ride out on parchment-backed horses, bidding people to tether their hopes to older wages and stricter days. Yet parchment is thin and life is thick. Between hedge and byre, in the shade of barns and under the gaze of herricks, the price of hands is agreed upon by those whose hands do the work. A lord who listens finds the field's answer. A lord who will not listen learns to wait. I pass a smithy where the bargain is as warm as the iron. The master sets tools upon the bench like questions. The journeyman answers with sparks. They speak not of subservience but of pride, of a day's shape that includes both sweat and bread, both fire and rest. Children watch from the doorway and measure their own futures by this calm conversation, thinking, perhaps, that a life can be hammered into fairness with steady blows and a bucket of clean water. In the alehouse that smells of malt and scrubbed wood, I take the measure of new songs. They are not loud. They coil like smoke and then unfurl. Verses remember the vanished politely and then turn to the remaining with a quiet courage. To keep one's tools sharp, to keep one's word, to keep one's feet under one's own command. If anyone raises a cup to hope, it is done without brashness, as one might toast the hearth for staying warm through rain. Thus is the price of hands set anew, not by decree alone, but by the shared knowledge that life, pared down by sorrow, has become precious, and that precious things must be handled with care. Morning leans pale against the parish stones when I step into the manor yard. The reeves' tally sticks lie in their basket like tidy bones, each notch a memory of work promised and work done. Once, the tally sang of days owed, plowing for the Lord, mowing his meadows, carting his grain. Now the music changes key. In the hush after loss, time itself has grown dear. Men look to their own strips, women to their own gardens, and the old duties begin to loosen like winter's knots. I watch as coin takes the place of service, as a rent once paid in sweat is weighed in silver's cool light. This is not rebellion. It is a reweaving. The steward brings out his inkhorn as if it were a small, black bird, and feeds it careful thoughts. Entries are made in a steadier hand. So much for the holding, so much for the hearth, and so much forgiven in a season of hard rain. The words are not generous in the indulgent sense. They are balanced, built to hold. With money comes choice. A category who has worked 3 days for the Lord's harvest buys back the 4th for his own. A widow who would have sent a son to hoe another's field instead counts copper into the reeve's palm and keeps the boy near, teaching him how to trellis peas against the cottage wall where the sun is tender. The manor learns that coin has its own weather. It can be hoarded against bad years. It can be lent in small kindnesses across a lane. It can speak in the village's favor at a distant court. Land, too, learns to change its clothing. Tenures are rewritten like old prayers spoken with new meanings. Where once the parchment bristled with penalties, it now blooms with particulars. inheritance made plain, rights of pasture named as one name's children, obligations timed to seasons rather than whims. The villagers read with fingers tracing each clause, learning their own names again inside the law's long sentences. When dispute arises, as it must, for human hearts are varied as hedgerow leaves, settlement is sought in rooms where the air is thick with beeswax and near silence. The church porch becomes a court of peace. The Lord's hall opens its long bench to testimony given without fear. A candle stands between speakers like a gentle sentinel. Voices do not climb, they deepen. Agreement is inked with the slow gravity of those who know the dead are listening. In this rewriting, dignity puts on its working clothes. Responsibility does as well. A man who can hire his time must keep his promise to the dawn. A woman who pays her rent in coin must keep the purse's mouth tight against foolishness. Children, watching, learn the feel of agency as they might learn the heft of a scythe. With respect, with instruction, with a sense that every tool can heal or harm depending on the hand. By the time swallows stitch the evening, the manor book is closed with a ribbon soft as a blessing. The village breathes easier. Tomorrow will not be perfect, but it will be earned, and there is a kindness in that. Beyond the last fence, where the fields become a garment of many pockets, the commons lie in their ancient patience. Here, the meadow knows many names: pasture, pannage, turbary, gleaning ground. Here, the rights of the poor and the small are not charity. They are custom, older than any single house, as binding as a vow spoken to a running stream. I walk among stakes newly set, not to divide, but to remind. A simple rod at the brook announces where reeds may be cut and where they must be left to stitch the bank against flood. On the moor, a ring of stones marks the place where peat may be lifted and where the land is to rest. In the oak shade, someone has carved a sign of acorns on a post. Pigs will come later, bells soft at their necks, to harvest what the trees have let fall. The sound of their contentment is a low, agreeable rattle, the melody of fattening weather. At the edge of the corn, after the Lord's carts have passed and the barn doors have swallowed the season, the village keeps its word to those whose hands are smallest. Gleaning begins. A line of figures, shawled and quiet, moves through the stubble, stooping, rising, stooping again, gathering what the sheaves forgot. No one scolds. The children run ahead, laugh softly, bring their triumphs to the aprons that will carry them home. In these last gleanings lives a theology of mercy, unwritten, unargued, simply enacted upon the earth. Disputes do not disappear. A hedge cut too deep, a ditch widened overnight, a gate swung shut on a path that once lay open. Such things bruise the village lightly and must be mended. And so the community meets, not always with words, sometimes with a walk. They go together along the boundaries, touching posts, setting a stone upright, showing a newcomer where the cows may tread and where the larks must be left their nests. Such a walk educates more kindly than a quarrel. The map is not on parchment here. It is underfoot. The commons teach a grammar of enough. If the gorse is cut too low this winter, there will be less bloom for the bees when spring arrives. And so someone stays a hand, and the bees are thanked in advance. If the brook is netted too greedily, there will be no minnows come summer. And so holes are left wide enough that the water may keep a portion of its own life. In these courtesies, hunger is not ignored. It is given a longer view. Even the sky seems to practice this shared restraint. A skein of geese passes over and leaves the evening silence unbroken behind it. A shepherd, bringing his flock from the long pasture, lifts his hat to the mare and foal grazing near the path, as if to say, "Today we have not trespassed upon one another's kindness." The foal leans its soft face against his sleeve and snuffs, and that, too, is a covenant of sorts. As night draws its shawl over the commons, small lights bloom at their edges, hearths welcoming home those who have taken only their share. The moon, impartial and content, shines on all equally, on stubble and furrow, on hedge and road, on the common and the private strip. Under that cool fairness, sleep comes readily. Tomorrow will ask again for balance. Tomorrow will, in gentle ways, provide. The year turns its wooden spoon through the village pot, and supper grows richer than it once dared to be. I slip into kitchens where the walls are seasoned with steam and laughter, where spoons wear new shine upon their handles from being held by hands that are less hurried and more hopeful. Bread leads the procession as it must. The loaves are broader, their crusts brown as kindly earth, their crumb a soft geography of holes that collect butter like shallow pools after rain. Wheat returns to many tables, but barley holds its ground, honest and filling, with a whisper of the fields still in it. Oats, too, make their argument in the morning, warming bellies against chores, carrying children to noonday with cheeks bright as apples. The pot that hangs over the fire has its own evolving lexicon. Not only cabbage and onion now, not only thin broth stretched to the week's end. Meat visits more often. Pork that remembers the oak wood, mutton enriched by long walks across heather. Broth is learned as an art. Bones first, then herbs in their right order, then a patience that cannot be bought. When the pot is lifted and the steam enters the rafters like a hymn, the household grows quiet in gratitude too deep for much speech. Butter sits upon the board with the confidence of a guest who has been asked not merely to visit, but to stay. Its yellowness is a kind of sunlight captured, a memory of meadow. Cheese ages in cool corners, wheels turned as carefully as a child in sleep. A soft cheese for today, a hard for winter. The future tucked away against the frost's opinionated voice. From the river and the pond come favors. Eels that knot and unknot like old tales, carp with solemn faces, trout so quick that the pan must be ready to honor their brief flame. In towns, salt fish returns with the carts, and the smell of brine speaks of distant coasts where other hands blessed other waters. Even the poorest, on certain days, taste the sea by way of the market and find themselves kin to weather beyond their own. Herbs keep their counsel above the door and in the pot as well. Sage with pork, thyme with broth, parsley scattered like green snow over eggs. Aloes perfect their brewing until the village knows which door to seek when thirst requires comfort rather than rowdiness. Casks are tapped with a calm competence, and the ale that flows is friendly, a companion to conversation instead of a tyrant over it. With better fare comes a gentler rhythm. Work has pauses that are real. At midday, a cloth is spread even if only upon a stump. A heel of bread is cut, a sliver of cheese measured, a slice of apple shared. A laborer wipes his knife and smiles a little at nothing in particular. In that smile lies a great wealth, the wealth of enough. Feast days, when they arrive, no longer feel like apologies for meager times. They are genuine celebrations rather than brief rebellions against hunger. Pies appear with lids sculpted into leaves. Custards tremble proudly on their dishes. Spices, once counted with the awe reserved for miracles, are pinched with a surety that speaks of trade grown steadier. The smell of cinnamon at a fair can make even a weary heart stand taller for a moment. As the supper hour fades and the hearth settles into its ember-lit breathing, the village is full of a satisfaction that makes no noise. Lamps are trimmed, cradles are rocked, bowls are set upside down to dry, their rims catching the candlelight like halos turned to ordinary use. Sleep comes after such eating not as a collapse but as a benediction. I find the smith at first light, his fire already speaking in its coppery tongue. He greets the day with tongs and patience, and the day answers with a glow that gathers at the iron's edge. Tools, like people, have learned a new courtesy. They are mended more often than replaced, sharpened on stones that have been inherited like lullabies, oiled and wrapped as one would wrap a small gift. In the fields, plows take on a surer line. Some are drawn by horses whose collars sit easy upon strong necks, distributing the work with a wisdom born of many seasons. Others by oxen, patient as thinking, who move the world forward one tempered breath at a time. The furrow deepens under such guidance, and the soil breaks into a fine, obedient crumble that receives seed as a cradle receives an infant. Time itself is a tool, and people learn its teeth. The hours are not chased, they are harnessed. A bell in the church tower announces morning, but within that bell's larger circle, smaller rhythms settle in. There is a right moment to set the scythe upon the whetstone, a right moment to lift it and begin the sweep that lays grass in neat, sighing ranks. There is a right moment to rest, not because a body fails, but because lasting requires it. Workshops hum like contented hives. The carpenter's plane pearls along the board and leaves behind a ribbon of wood you could almost wear. The weaver's shuttle learns to fly more smoothly, held by hands that have spent more hours in practice since the fields asked for fewer every day. Even the potter's will turns with a meditative grace, clay rising and narrowing, rising again, the shape of usefulness repeated until it is refined into something like joy. Children are invited to learn these tools as one is invited into a story, slowly, with room for wonder. A boy is given a small hammer and taught that striking is not the essence of it. Listening is. A girl holds a spindle and hears how twist and tension make a thread strong enough to hold a life together. These lessons are not urgent. They are, instead, enduring. And when the day's work is done, the tools rest in a dignity of their own. A scythe is hung where air will greet it kindly. A knife's edge is kissed by a final brush of leather. The broom leans contented against its corner, knowing it will be called upon after supper to make the floor speak of order once again. Thus do tools and time conspire to make labor human, neither idle nor enemy, but a companion that walks beside the soul at an even pace. As twilight lays its cool hand on the village, small rooms bloom with purpose. A spinning wheel begins to purr by the doorway, catching the breeze, catching gossip, catching dreams. The hum is the sound of thread inventing itself from fluff. It is the hush song of patience. Nearby, a loom becomes a measured thunder, shuttle darting, heddles lifting and lowering with the authority of a hearth god. Wool is king in some valleys, flax queen in others. In both courts, craft is the true sovereign. Hands learn to judge a fleece with a glance, to know by the gleam and the curl what yarn it wishes to become. Fingers wet with spit tame a stubborn tuft. Skeins are washed and hung like small clouds along the cottage beam, dripping their softness into the air. Dyes gather in earthen pots, colors brewed with the seriousness usually reserved for vows. Woad stains the rim with a blue that remembers the sky after rain. Madder speaks in rooted reds. Walnut hulls gift a brown deep as forest shadow. The cloth that emerges is not merely fabric. It is the season written in thread, the hill and weather bound into something that warms a body and declares a household's quiet ambition. Beyond the door, fulling mills learn to beat the cloth into strength, water doing its even-tempered work, hammers lifted and lowered like a giant's careful heartbeat. The village listens at night and counts those distant blows as others count the surf. Calming, continuous, reliable. Trade routes thicken like riverbeds after a considerate flood. A packman arrives with ribbons and needles, a length of fine imported cloth to be turned into a Sunday garment. A story from a town where bells are so many that time itself seems to walk in company. Women helm much of this industry, not as exception but as law of nature. Their accounts are kept in chalk on fresh scrubbed boards, in the tilt of a jar, in the weight of a purse tied beneath an apron. Masters of many small economies, they balance the price of fleece, the worth of their own hours, the cost of salt and soap. Their craft gives the household a second harvest, one not at the mercy of weather, and their steadiness begins to be felt in the market as well as at the cradle. In these rooms of endeavor, the mood is neither frantic nor grand. It is the mood of bees. Busy, yes, but also serene. Work and conversation weave together, stories and cloth lengthening side by side until both may be folded, set away, brought out when winter asks for warmth of body or spirit. Between the hedges, the road stretches like an invitation written in dust. I meet those who have taken it up, young men with tools wrapped in sacking, women with baskets of wares, scholars with their books held like loaves, minstrels with their quiet instruments. Their steps are not desperate. They are deliberate, each footfall a question asked kindly of the world. Where next will need meet skill? Badges glint on caps and cloaks, tokens of guild or town, proof that the bearer has a place somewhere even as they seek a place today. Markets become map and compass both. In one village, a hiring fair sets its temporary city of stalls and carts. Masters walk with thoughtful faces. Hands are extended and taken. Terms are spoken and sealed with a nod. A lad who yesterday had no work today has a ribbon on his cap and a promise tucked into his heart like a letter. At the edges of towns, New rules appear like hedges grown for guidance, not confinement. Some frown upon wandering that has no purpose, and it is true that idleness, when it ferments, can sour the common air. Yet most who travel now carry purpose openly, tools, samples, letters of introduction. Priors and mayors and reeves learn to look past suspicion and into the satchel where honest intent is kept. The road itself teaches manners. Those who walk it regularly know where the good water can be had and leave a sign for those who follow. 3 stones set in a small pyramid, a sprig of green thrust into a fence post. They know which barns welcome sleepers in the hay when storms stride across the open ground, and which door will open to a soft knock if the hour grows late and the mile grows long. Hospitality becomes a currency that buys safety for everyone, and thus it is widely spent. I arrive at a wayside cross where notices are pinned beneath a simple carving. A paper flutters with a list of wages promised in a manner 2 valleys away. Another bears the marks of a craftsman seeking an apprentice who can keep tidy silence as well as sweepings. A third is nothing but a prayer for a lost sister, last seen on the high road with a red kerchief and a pack of needles for sale. I pass a hand over that one and wish the road would carry her gently to the door that is waiting for her. So does this age, for all its grief, become a season of movement, not of scattering but of rearrangement. Like starlings at dusk, the people shift until they find the branch that will hold them through the night. The road does not mind the traffic. It accepts footprints as the sea accepts pebbles. Some evenings, in the low beam of the alehouse, I hear a different register in the talk, a murmur that tests its strength without wishing to frighten itself. It begins with stories of petition answered kindly in one place and ignored in another. It continues with the mention of lords who learned to listen and of others who summoned the past with a horn and expected it to arrive whole and obedient. People do not wish to quarrel with their bread, but they have eaten fear for many seasons and prefer, now, to taste courage. So they gather in churchyards after Mass, in barns after the barley is stacked, in greens where the maypole sleeps under weathered ribbons. They speak clearly. They do not shout. A charter is talked of, a simple thing, a written promise that tomorrow's fairness shall not depend upon the mood of any single man. There are summers when the air warms these murmurs into action. Banners are taken from rafters where they kept company with drying herbs. Feet that have walked to market now walk farther, and in company. The great houses learn that doors can be knocked upon by many hands at once. Yet even as tempers quicken, the village mind remembers tenderness. When the wind threatens to carry sparks too far, wise elders pour water upon hot heads and urge a return to the virtue that first fed the talk. Reason, not rage. What rises in these years is not only resistance, it is understanding. People discover that the law belongs to them as well, that custom is a living tree they are charged to tend, not a fossil to be worshipped from a distance. They learn to write their names, and when they cannot write, to make a mark that is honored. They learn to read what affects their bread and their children's futures. The murmurs of rising become the murmurs of reading, and both are a kind of waking. When unrest passes, as weather must, the village sets about its usual work with a deeper quiet than before. Some gains are kept, small ones that matter every day, like a fairer rent, a gentler command, a steward who asks instead of orders. Some hopes are postponed and laid away, not in despair, but in the same cupboard where seeds are kept for spring. The people have learned to wait without sleeping, and so chapter 1 draws its shawl around its shoulders. The fields are no longer empty. The hedges sing with birds, the lanes carry bargaining and song, and the air itself seems to bear a promise stitched into its hem. I turn from the green and look toward the glow of hearths where families settle to their evening. There, in the soft clatter of bowls and the slow folding of cloth, the next chapter is already breathing. Come with me now, gently, into the doorways where keys hang on cords and windows look out with wiser eyes. We will sit with those who keep houses and hearts, and learn how the hearth was rekindled after the long shadow. I step beneath a lintel darkened by many winters, and the air greets me with the quiet perfume of bread and beeswax. On a cord at the hearth's edge hangs a set of iron keys, heavy as remembered promises. They belong to a woman whose hair is braided like a field path, neat and purposeful. She turns the keys in her palm when she thinks, not fidgeting, but measuring. Cupboard for grain, a chest for linen, a small coffer where the household's silver sleeps like moonlight folded into wood. She moves through her rooms with a calm authority learned not from books but from the stern tutor named Necessity. When the great dying lifted, it left her standing in a doorway that had once framed two shadows. She did not wail to the hedges or bargain with the empty sky. She lit the fire, she counted the flour, she set the benches back beneath the table, and in that simple litany the house remembered itself. Neighbors come with small offerings. Yeast that remembers yesterday, a spool of thread, a brace of onions sun-wrinkled and sweet. She receives each gift as if it were a psalm and answers with her own. A loaf gone golden, a spare blanket, a hand upon a shoulder that steadies more than ropes or beams. Soon, advice comes to her as well, wrapped in questions. How to price a fleece at market, how to reckon a fair rent with the steward who will listen, and how to stare down the one who will not. The keys chime softly at her waist as she walks to the green, and that sound becomes its own argument. This house is kept, this hearth burns, this life is stewarded with care. In the evenings, when the sweepings are done and the cat has curled into the warm square that belongs to it by ancient covenant, she sits with a slate and a stub of chalk. Her figures are neat as stitches, and they spell out courage. Milk enough for winter, a hen set to brood, seed to be saved, seed to be risked. She breaks the chalk and smiles a little at the dust upon her fingers, as if the house itself had offered to sign its name beside hers. I have watched such women step through the village like lanterns, steady and unboastful. Some take apprentices into their kitchens and teach the grammar of boiling and baking, the punctuation of salt. Some hire a lad to fetch and carry, a girl to tend the cradle, and pay in coin that clinks like gentle rain. All of them keep the keys, not as trophies, but as tools, cool to the touch, honest as iron, speaking in a voice even silence respects. The lane outside is embroidered with broom, bright and honey-scented. Along it travel not just carts and cows, but intentions. I follow to a cottage where a pair sits on the bench, hands folded like quiet birds in their laps. They do not look at one another much. They look, instead, at the piece of woven cloth spread between them, a dowry of work already done. It holds her hours and her patience, his hopes and his promise to make a roof's edge meet the sky without quarrel. In the wake of loss, betrothals have learned a slower music. Weddings are not rushed like soldiers to a gate. They are coaxed as one coaxes a fire, with kindling arranged thoughtfully and logs chosen for their temper. Fathers speak to mothers, mothers to aunts, aunts to godparents, and each voice is a thread in the braid. What is brought to the marriage is counted gently, not only in coins or acres, but in skills that keep a winter sweet. The making of cheese that does not sulk, the mending of shirts without complaint, the steady hand that can lay a hedge true, the eye that knows the weather's face. Promises are crafted with care. Not the old thunder of forever shouted beneath a garlanded arch, but vows that fit the daily round. To rise when the other is weary, to keep tempers banked like coals for the cold hour when warmth is most needed, to carry news to a partner kindly, and never at the speed of gossip. A ring is slipped upon a finger and seems less a prison than a compass. It points to home and back again, making a circle of two that welcomes others without losing shape. Not all matches are made of cinnamon and song. Sometimes, two households negotiate as if they were merchants balancing a ledger that includes fears as well as flour. There are widowers with stern brows and soft hearts, widows with keen wits and worn aprons, young men too ready with laughter and young women already old with care. Yet even the awkward bargains often learn their grace. The year's work teaches them. Hay won't stack itself, nor will bread. Shared labor is an eloquent tutor, and under its instruction strangers become companions. Companions become kin. Feasts on the day itself are gentler than before. Less boasting, fewer horns. More bread set aside for the poor. More chairs fetched for elders. More blessings spoken without embroidery, but with a conviction that warms the tongue. The dance that follows is patient. It leaves room for those who tire easily, room for laughter that never points or cuts. When the couple steps across the threshold together, The broom laid before them is symbolic, yes, but also practical. Life is a room to be tended. They both bend, lift, and sweep. Dust does not mind whose hand bears the bristles. It only minds to be carried kindly out. Part 3. Fewer cradles, quieter nights. Later, in a room where the walls remember prayers, I sit by a window that overlooks the lane. The moon smooths everything with her cool hand, and the village seems to breathe in one long, even sleep. There are fewer cries in the night. Fewer infants wake the rafters with their bright summons. The lullabies that once braided from house to house now twine in single strands. This is not only sorrow, it is also spacing. Marriages that waited now wait a little longer still. Mouths are counted against larders, and hope is tempered like a good blade, capable of shining, yet unwilling to snap. Children born in these years are guarded not with fear's timidity, but with a vigilant tenderness. Their shoes are kept mended as if the road itself had asked to carry them kindly. Their porridge never runs thin. On cold mornings, a second cloak appears about small shoulders without ceremony, as though the house had grown it overnight from beams and thatch. Households learn to expand not by number but by care. A godparent visits on market day and leaves an orange or a tasseled charm against nightmares. A neighbor with no child of her own sits by a cradle while the mother fetches water, and talks to the sleeping infant about the weather as one would speak to a beloved elder. The elders, for their part, become nurseries of story. They pass down tales that do not hurry the heart, tales that make courage into a familiar rather than a stranger who arrives with a shout. With fewer little ones, some work shifts its weight and finds new balance. The time once spent laundering tiny garments becomes time for spinning, for reading a psalm, for mending the fence so thoughtfully that even the wind compliments it. At the school bench, the master looks out over a smaller sea of faces and steers a steadier course. Letters settle more clearly into minds. Numbers begin to behave. The rod grows dusty for lack of purpose, and kindness, shy but persistent, learns to teach. The hush of these nights is not empty. It is a full vessel holding relief and ache in equal measures. When a baby's cry does rise, it rings like a silver bell across the green, and every listening heart answers, even if only in a dream, with the old blessing, grow, grow and be held. At the church porch, the register lies open beneath a small stone to hold it against the world's smallest winds. Names go into it like seeds, some to sprout into long narratives, some to rest in the soil of remembrance. Among those names are children who came loose from their first tetherings and needed new cords. I have watched godparents lean forward on a Sunday morning when the priest's words hang like lanterns. A hand goes out to a child not born under their roof but placed, by custom and quiet affection, beneath their wing. The bond is not showy. It is a practice. It is the extra loaf wrapped in cloth and left at a door without knock or pride. It is a pair of boots turned out overnight from leather that had been saved for a finer purpose. It is a place at the table that is always set with unquestioned certainty, a stool pulled close to the fire when snow mends the world into one long whiteness. Some orphans go to kin, to an aunt whose laugh has the music of the mother they lost, to a cousin who teaches them how to read the buyer's moods. Others find new households entirely, and there new patterns are woven with care, the chores assigned in portion with the child's strength, the praise given in measures sweet enough to heal without making the tongue greedy. The child's first winter in such a house is the long exam. When spring arrives and a small set of hands plants beans alongside larger ones, when a shared joke takes root between broom and milking stool, the adoption is complete, though no parchment says so. Parishes, too, learn to matter more than walls can show. The almonry door becomes a hinge upon which many days swing gently, porridge ladled with discretion, blankets counted and recounted, a pair of spectacles repaired for an elder who then reads aloud to 6 little listeners who take the words home on their tongues. The churchyard is a school of patience. Children learn to walk respectfully among stones, to trace letters not yet mastered upon names that will be said at family tables every harvest. And always, there is the web that cannot be entered in any ledger. Women at the well keeping tally not of scandal but of need. Men with spare minutes mending a neighbor's gate and pretending they were passing by anyway. The miller slipping an extra handful of flour into a sack because the child who carries it wears courage like a too large coat. Such arithmetic is not done on slates. It is done in the heart, and the heart does not make mistakes. When the sun climbs only a little and decides to enjoy the morning from there, I walk into the square where trade lifts its many-colored wings. At the center stands the market cross, its stone warmed by the hands of centuries. Around it, women array their work with a confidence that brooks neither apology nor swagger. They spread cloth to catch the eye and lay out measures to satisfy the mind. Eggs gleam with the polish of careful washing. Wheels of cheese sit like mild planets. Bundles of rosemary send their good news into the air. Voices here are instruments tuned to commerce. Not shrill, not shy. An alewife calls out the merits of yesterday's brew and today's. One sturdy, one bright, inviting a choice rather than demanding a coin. A spicer lifts the lid of a wooden box, and a small cloud of clove and cinnamon rises like a memory of foreign harbors. A midwife stops between one errand and the next and trades news as one might trade seeds. A family well again after fever, a pregnancy walking its quiet calendar capably, a caution about a certain barber who leans too quick toward his leeches. Coin moves like thoughtful water, pausing in hollows, finding new courses. Women count it with fingers that also count pulses. They write small debts in chalk upon the undersides of lids, and the lids do not betray them. They confer across the square with a glance that holds a dozen footnotes, and decisions are made long before words arrive. Cloth is measured against outstretched arm spans, and while the length is considered, wisdom travels. How to sweeten a stubborn child's temper with a game that makes no fuss. How to coax sour milk into a cake that will keep peace at table. How to keep a steward friendly without encouraging his folly. Men come to buy, to sell, to learn, and they do learn. That economy is a fabric, not a ledger alone. That markets thrive on trust as much as on the glitter of silver. That the hand that rocks the cradle writes, with the other hand, the very rules that keep the town alive. In the tidy shadow of the cross, civility is enforced not by threat but by the cool, unimpressed eye of women who will not let the world slip backward if they can help it. By noon, the square smells of bread warmed on stones, of apples giving up their tartness to the knife, of juniper smoke from a brazier where sausages hiss like friendly serpents. The cross keeps its silent counsel. Pigeons circle and settle, and a child, having exchanged a single coin for a ribbon of dangerous blue, marches home with wealth fluttering from her sleeve. The market's music lowers to a hum. For a moment, the village, the town, the world seems held in a careful hand. Balanced, busy, kind. At dawn, I walk the lane where house doors begin to breathe open, and from them step the young. Caps straightened, aprons tied, faces set to learning. Service is the first rung of many ladders. Step stools stand ready in kitchens and halls, small thrones for small hands. A girl balances on one to reach the high shelf where the good bowls sleep. A boy climbs his to polish a candlestick until it holds a quiet sunrise in its curve. They are bound not by chains but by hours, by the clock of chores that begins with stirring embers and ends with locking shutters. The mistress of the house teaches with a tone that never needs to rise. How to sweep so the corners feel respected. How to lay a table so that bread does not feel lonely. How to pour ale without waking the froth to anger. The master teaches, too, in the steady grammar of tasks. How to trim a quill. How to carry wood without dropping its dignity. How to listen for the true thirst of a horse. These young servants send letters home with market carts. The words are plain. I am spent but learning. I have been given a pair of good shoes. They keep Sundays kindly. Wages are not great floods, but they trickle sweetly. A coin for a ribbon for a smile for courage when winter leans close. More important than coin, perhaps, are the rights that arrive with competence. A key entrusted, a chore done unsupervised, a corner by the hearth that becomes a named place, not borrowed but bestowed. They learn the soft craft of belonging. They come to know where the wheat jar stands by touch alone on a moonless morning. They discover the single floorboard that complains and step around it for the sake of sleepers. They gather remedies for the household's moods as carefully as they gather eggs. A fresh log for a fraying temper, a joke for a wet day, a song low, steady, for a child who fears the thunder of nothing in particular. In time, the steps tools give way to taller ladders. The girl who learned the art of simmer and salt becomes the house's sure hand. The boy who mastered polish and patience comes to keep the accounts with the same sheen. Many will go on to households of their own, carrying forward the quiet laws learned here. That work done steadily is a kind of music, that respect requires no shouting, that a home is built daily from a dozen small loyalties. There is a chamber where the world narrows to a woman's breath and the gentle voices that braid around it. I stand in such a room now, at a respectful distance beside the chest where linens lie folded like clouds. The midwife arrives with a basket deeper than it looks. Inside are herbs whose names belong on friendly lips: raspberry leaf, lady's mantle, chamomile, and rue. There are warm stones wrapped like loaves, a cord cut clean from yesterday's task, a pair of hands that have learned to be as calm as winter light. The midwife speaks to the mother as to a fellow craftswoman. "We will work," she says without words, placing a damp cloth upon her brow, setting a stool just so, opening the shutter a hand's width to let the air agree with the hour. The household understands its part. Water is warmed until it hums softly. The kettle's lid is lifted and settled with the delicacy of birds alighting. The cat is swept kindly from the threshold because cats love thresholds and forget their manners there. Herbs steep and surrender their goodness. Gentle drafts ease fear more than they erase pain. Courage does most of the lifting. On the wall hangs a sprig of rosemary bound with blue thread. Not charm, exactly, but remembrance. A reminder that others have passed through this narrow gate and found the meadow beyond. A prayer might be whispered, not as a bargain with heaven, but as a breathing with it. When the child arrives, the world enlarges without fanfare. The midwife nods, not triumphant, only satisfied, and sets about the ancient business of first care. Warmth, cleanliness, breath counted as if counting stars. The room smells of linen and life. The father, if he stands near, looks as if he has just learned a new alphabet and cannot stop reading. A small mark is made in a book later, a name linked to a day, but the real inscription is written in the hearts of those present who will carry this hour like a hidden candle for the rest of their walking. Herbal lore continues its quiet work long after the midwife has gone. The garden outside keeps a pharmacy of kindness. Mint for a troubled stomach, yarrow for a cut, elderflower for a fever that requires a lullaby. Remedies are taught alongside recipes, a household curriculum sung in season. I have seen a child led to the bed of marigolds and told, "This is sunshine you can touch," and later that sunshine set to steep for salve, and later still the salve applied to a scraped knee with the gravity such sacraments deserve. No sorcery here, only acquaintance with creation, a neighborliness with leaf and root. The art is not in the miracle but in the attention. And attention, tender and unafraid, is what heals. At the small school by the church, where swallows carve their signatures beneath the eaves, I listen as the master teaches the old subject called courtesy. He does not mean bows alone. He means the making of a life that moves through other lives without bruising them. The children recite gently from a little book, its pages softened by many thumbs. How to greet, how to sit, how to let another speak, how to disagree without setting fire to the straw of temper. They learn the courtship of words. Please is not a password, but a door held open. Thank you is not payment, but a placing of the gift in the right light so its giver can see it fully. Elbows understand tables. Shoes learn to sleep by the threshold with toes aligned like respectful geese. Hands discover the shape of their own strength and then the art of keeping it sheathed except when kindness requires its unsheathing. In these lessons there is less rule than rhythm. The master shows them how to read a room the way a shepherd reads a sky, where the gusts will come, where the quiet will settle, when to speak so that speech lands gently, when to be silent so that silence can do its soft work. They practice the graceful refusal, the cheerful consent, the apology that does not turn upon itself like a snare. Courtesy travels home in satchels with crumbed bread and bits of chalk and becomes the household's shared language. A child curtsies to a grandmother not as ceremony but as recognition. You have lived more seasons than I. Teach me to walk among them. A boy removes his cap when a funeral passes. and in that simple act the village sees its own goodness reflected. Even quarrels, when they visit, are given chairs and made to sit until they cool. I have seen courtesy mend what laws cannot reach. It smooths the edge of a steward's command. It stands beside a widow when bargaining. It keeps feast days merry and wakes gentle. It is the oil poured where the world might otherwise creak. On a morning bright with the smell of wet stone, a proclamation is read in the square. The words pace back and forth like a watchman. What may be worn, by whom, in what hue and fineness. Sumptuary law, with its careful scaffold of rank and cloth, tries to hold the mirror of order steady. Velvet for certain shoulders, fur for certain winters, silk for those whose coins have learned foreign languages. People listen with the expression they reserve for weather. Attentive, adaptive. Then they go about the business of dressing their lives. Menders take up needle and make a modest garment speak clearly of pride. Dyers coax lawful shades into quiet magnificence. Woad that deepens like dusk. Weld that keeps a sunlight of its own even when skies forget. A ribbon's width becomes a thoughtful argument on the sleeve. A lining, though unseen, turns a humble coat into a private festival. There are fines, sometimes, for colors that strayed too boldly into the day. But more often there is the village's older law, which understands the difference between vanity and gladness. A bride's kerchief embroidered with a forbidden gleam is excused if the stitching was done by a grandmother whose eyes are leaving and whose last joy wanted a little shine. A boy's feast day cap garnished with a feather from the common pheasant is tolerated because he caught it in a hedge with laughter, not guile. Gild marks appear upon cloth like small, proud signatures. A bolt from a certain town declares not only its weave but the honesty of the hands that made it. Buyers come to know these marks as they know faces, and trust travels the roads rolled into bales. Law may set the frame, but within it, art works with a steady, generous hand. Dress becomes statement without clamor. Clean seams, good fastenings, color that respects the season. I have walked through rooms where garments hang like well-behaved whether along a beam, each one smelling faintly of smoke and soap, each one ready to turn a day into its best self. The politics of a ribbon's shade still matter, yes, but more and more the village is clothed in the fabric of sufficiency. Durable, decent, light enough to let the body breathe and the heart be seen. When the year kneels at the threshold of a holy day, the village puts on its kindly face. Work sets down its burdens in the porch and comes in with only its good stories. The green is tidied. A maypole wakes and shakes out faded ribbons. The ale is tasted and approved by elders whose palates are tuned to gratitude. I stand beneath the ash where the fiddler tunes, his bow whispering promises. Games begin as if they had been waiting behind a hedge for a polite invitation. Bowls rolled along the close-cropped turf, a tug at the rope that feels more like laughter than contest. A race that ends not in breathless pride, but in shared collapse upon the grass with the sky applauding in blue. Children find pockets of wonder. A puppet's wooden face that learns to smile. A penny cake cut as carefully as a jewel. A painted saint who travels on a cart and nods benevolently to all. Church bells keep the day's bones aligned. A procession makes its way along a lane of petals and patience. Prayers are spoken with full mouths of air, not of argument. The choristers' voices wear the light like garments. Then the tables, long, hospitable, wide as old doors set upon trestles, are spread. Pies appear with leaves sculpted upon their lids as if the forest had contributed, custards trembling with delicate resolve, early strawberries that taste like red windows opened in the tongue. No drunken thunder, no excess that shames tomorrow. The merriment walks arm in arm with restraint, and together they guide the village through the bright hours. At dusk, lanterns are lit, and the shadows they cast look like kindly giants keeping watch. Old grievances volunteer to stay at home. New friendships prove themselves by carrying chairs for the elders and by whispering the day's goodness back and forth until memory fixes it. When the music slows and the last reel knots itself into night, the green returns to its usual breathing. A few petals cling where at dawn there were none. A few crumbs tell the moon that bread was shared. A ribbon remains caught in the hawthorn, to be found by a child tomorrow and woven into a secret. Thus the hearths of the village, once cooled by sorrow, have learned to keep a steady flame. Keys ring at belts, cradles rock, markets hum, colors speak without boasting. Feast days bless the common hour. The house of the world is not repaired all at once, but room by room it welcomes us again. I come to the city at the hour when broom bristles are first heard upon stone. Dawn has not yet argued its case. It has only laid a pale petition along the roofline. In the lanes, women and men sweep as if smoothing a garment before a ceremony. Dust, which has its own opinions, yields to the tide of neatness and rides away into corners where it can do no harm. Water follows, thrown from buckets in bright arcs that catch the timid sun. The gutters learn to sing. Bells take up their ancient duty, shaping the air like careful hands. The matin note enters each house and places a gentle finger upon every brow. Wake, not to trouble, but to the clean day. There is a new etiquette to breath itself, learned in hard seasons. Windows are opened early, shutters latched back as if to pin the morning in place. Herbs hang where drafts wander, rosemary greeting the street, lavender watching the courtyard. Cloths, rinsed and wrung, lift from lines like small white sails heralding traffic that has not yet arrived. Watchmen walk with staffs struck lightly, their pace designed to reassure rather than command. They pause at narrow turnings where once fear made itself large, and now only the smell of baked bread stands guard. In the first glow, apprentices hurry with buckets for the bakehouse, and the first loaves enter the oven, each a compact promise of warmth divided and shared. The city, which once coughed, now clears its throat politely and prepares to speak the language of the day. Downriver, where the tide lifts its measured brows, the port keeps a calendar stricter than any clerk's, not of saints alone, but of intervals and patience. Quaymen note the day a ship first shows her masts beyond the bar. A flag is sent up to say, wait. The harbor knows the art of waiting now. Days are counted with pebbles in a bowl, with chalk upon a post, with the deliberate turning of a small wooden dial in the harbor master's hand. Quarantine houses sit upon their island like mild hermits, roofs thatch bright, doors wide to air and light. There, travelers practice an easy discipline. They wash, they write letters folded like birds. They watch geese across the water and learn from their untroubled parliaments. Provisions are ferried with oars that barely disturb the tide's thoughtful face. Bells speak across the channel at agreed hours, a conversation of reassurance. All is well enough. When the counted days have passed, the first boat comes in neat as a proverb. Ropes take their turns about bollards worn smooth by centuries of trust. Customs men, who once were only purses and pens, now carry clean cloths and patience. They examine not only cargo but the manner of its keeping. Barrels tight as hymns, chests aired and lined with fresh straw, bales wrapped against damp with a sailor's particular care. The city has learned that caution can be courteous, and the port wears its vigilance like a well-cut coat. I walk beneath a string of signs that creak in a wind that smells of tallow and oak. Here the guild halls keep their benches polished and their vows memorized. Masters sit with hands scarred into maps of craft. Journeymen arrive with the pride that comes when skill and bread are at last the same word. Apprentices stand a little straighter than yesterday, because today they are permitted to touch the tool they have long admired. An oath is spoken, not loud, but with a clarity that places each syllable where it can be found again. It pledges fidelity to measure and line, to honest materials and to prices that neither cheat nor grovel. It promises that a mark set upon a finished piece will mean exactly what it has always meant, that the thing will neither fail in the wet nor warp in the sun. A cup of ale passes from hand to hand and is sipped, not drained. The guild seal is pressed into wax warm as breath, and the circle of trust tightens, not to exclude, but to hold. Within the workshops, order hums. The glovemaker's shapes lie like leaves on the bench. The cooper's hoops lean against the wall like patient moons. The goldsmith breathes as if counting the heartbeats of the metal itself. No one hurries the final touches. That is the only law stricter than the watch. Haste is the enemy of pride. Outside, the street receives these goods with the relief of someone given a cloak exactly when the wind turns. The market by the riverside opens its many mouths, each stall a language learned over long roads. Here, salt sits in clean pyramids, a small mountain range against which fish and cheese lean with gratitude. There, still cool as thought slides through a merchant's fingers, a ribbon of distant light made tame for the city's dim corridors. Sacks of grain are trundled to the scales with the respect due to a council of elders. Wheat listens. Rye sterner makes its case. Barley grins and goes willingly to the mill. Voices rise and fall like the tide. A carter tells of a bridge mended beyond the hills. A drover swears the droves are calmer this season, as if herded by the memory of hush. The spice seller lists the virtues of far-off sun in words that make tongues tingle before a pinch is tasted. Pepper to sharpen thought, saffron to gild a feast day, anise to ease a cough nested in a hard winter. Yet even in such exotic company, the staple remains the city's heart. Grain stores win praise for their cleanliness. Bins are swept as devoutly as altars. The baker's boy, sent to buy, is schooled to look not only at price but at the shine of each kernel. Tallies are kept with a tenderness that once was spared only for letters home. The timber merchant notes where every beam lay growing in its first life. The cloth dealer records who wove which yard, so the coin may find its way back along the threads to the proper hand. The city's purse is not a mouth that devours but a throat that swallows and feeds in turn. And all the while the river, pleased with this civility, shouldered by wharf and hull, keeps time. In a counting room shaded by shutters, I stand beside a table smooth as old water. Upon it lie the tools of believing, notched sticks that meet and match when sundered halves are reunited, small weights rubbed to a dull glow, ink that dries to the color of honest earth. Two women conduct the morning settlement. One holds the ledger, the other holds her gaze. Sums murmur between them, and with each figure spoken softly, a thread tightens from stall to stall, workshop to workshop, quay to granary. Trust is slow to grow and quick to bruise. The city knows this and treats it like a child that must be kept warm and never startled. A debt is carried like a sleeping infant, not jostled, not forgotten, not handed to strangers. When a miscount happens, it is examined with the patience one grants to weather. Was it a gust, a shadow, a leaf across the dial? The correction is made without public shaming, for trust thrives in dignity as grain thrives in dry air. At day's end, the tally sticks are tied with ribbon and set in a chest that smells of cedar. The key turns with a sound like a promise kept. Those who leave the room do so a little taller, as if exactness itself had lent them stature. They step into the street and spend fairly, and fair spending is a contagion the city is glad to carry. There are doors in this city that open only outward. Behind them, fire is coaxed to kindness from dawn until dusk. Porridge bubbles as if it were rehearsing contentment. Loaves are sliced along lines as even as law. Bowls are stacked like blessings that intend to be given away. In the almonry, no one asks for a story before ladling. Need is its own testimony, and today the soup is made with marrow enough that even the weak feel a small drum of strength within an hour. Clerks keep lists because lists protect the small from the careless. Yet a discretion lives beside the inkpot. A widow who pretends she has come only to inquire about a friend is given 2 measures without being unmasked. A boy with pride stitched too tightly at his sleeves is sent on an errand that happens to end at the bakehouse door, where a loaf weighs down his pocket briefly and then his hunger not at all. The city's mercy has learned to walk on quiet feet and to speak with a voice that never draws a crowd. In a corner, garments hang, mended and clean. A pair of boots awaits the man whose soles have told the street too much truth. A shawl waits for the woman whose winter last year overstayed its welcome upon her shoulders. These are not leftovers. They are the first fruits of a gentler harvest, the habit of enough shared on purpose. Along a cloister wall, I pause before figures that move without moving, paint teaching what breath sometimes forgets. The dance of death has come to town with its solemn humor. Skeleton and peasant, skeleton and merchant, skeleton and noble. Each pair steps in time, a reel that makes mockery kind. There is no jeering. The bones are not cruel. They are democratic, that is all, and the music they imply is set in a key that cautions without scolding. Children stare first with wide eyes, then with that sly relief which comes when a fear has been given a friendly mask. A priest, passing, lifts a brow and smiles. The wall has preached a sermon he need not repeat. A painter's ladder leans nearby. He has added at the edge a small figure not yet noticed by many. A midwife dancing with death, both of them grinning, for they have been colleagues a long age and know that birth and ending share a hallway. These images do not make the city morbid. They make it honest. They permit laughter at the table without the sin of forgetting. They hang in the vantage of the everyday so that sorrow will not ambush the unwary, but meet them with courtesy when it must meet them at all. And as the sun moves, bones and gowns take turns with the light, as if to show the rhythm that holds all breath in common time. On the square, a wagon is drawn to a halt, and its sides are let down into a stage like a cabinet opened to reveal a festival of drawers. Players spill their weathered magic upon the boards. A prophet speaks in rhyme that even fishmongers can keep, and an angel's wing, stitched from goose feathers and wit, persuades the eyes of cynics that perhaps the sky has not retired. Children drink the story through their skin. Elders take a seat on the steps and let allegory wash their ankles like a warm tide. Later, at the hour when the bells lift the day toward its evening with care, the pulpit receives a different eloquence. A sermon plants seed deeper than jest, watered by psalm and pause. The preacher is no tyrant. He is a gardener of hearts, and he knows to leave spaces where silence can do what words cannot. He speaks of mercy as an arithmetic that never fails and of justice as a path that climbs but does not cut the feet. Outside, the players put away their wings and count their coins with laughter. The city, caught between play and pulpit, learns to breathe in a cadence that feeds both mind and belly. At the edge of the city, the ground is kept as one keeps a book much loved. Repaired at the spine, pages flattened where grief pressed too hard. New stones rise with fewer flourishes now, simpler lines, names cut fair and deep, dates marked as lanterns rather than as scars. Small chapels are raised, not lofty, but steadfast. Within them, candles learn the patience of winter afternoons. They are lit for the dead and for the living who must continue. Craft follows mourning and makes it gentle. Masons choose smoother stone. Glaziers warm their glass with colors that console rather than impress. A chantry hums at vespers with the sound of names breathed into melody. The city's feet pass often by these places, willingly. To remember is to keep faith with the promise that sorrow will not be asked to carry its own weight alone. Around the churchyard walls, gardens are planted with rosemary and rue, clipped into kindness rather than terror. Children chase each other along paths that weave between history's letters, and no one scolds them. It is good for laughter to learn the geography of endings. It teaches it how to find the way home afterward. Dusk gathers the city into the pocket of its cloak. Windows become small constellations, and from them float instruments more domestic than grand. A pipe's tender tune, a viol's low thread, the tapping of a spoon upon the rim of a bowl in rhythm with a story. Taverns breathe out a sweet, yeasty companionship. Laughter does not flash like lightning now. It glows like banked coals, steady and sufficient. Festivity returns in shapes the day can sustain tomorrow. A neighbor brings a pie with a lattice that suggests someone cares for geometry as well as cinnamon. A bench is dragged into the lane and shared by 3 households that gossip about nothing dangerous. A guard, passing, nods to a cat who minds the doorstep as if the city had hired it. Lanterns are set out. Some have paper shades painted with vines and birds, and these make the alley momentarily a pergola beneath which night feels welcome. Joy has learned to be a custom, not an outbreak. It is woven into the week like a bright thread that shows up here and there to remind the cloth of its own potential. The city, once breathless, once frightened, now wears its mask of contentment without deceit. Beneath it, the face has healed. I lean upon a post and count the blessings that do not make noise. Clean water in a jug, a child's slate rubbed smooth for tomorrow's sums, a wharf whose ropes do not creak in panic, a chapel whose door will be open at dawn. So does the city keep its covenant with life. Brooms at daybreak, bells that tell time without tyranny, tallies that honor trust, hands that make, hearts that remember, mouths that bless. The masks are not lies. They are courtesies, ways of showing one another the best we are learning to be. I step onto a road that knows the measure of prayers. It keeps to hedges, to river bends, to the wide skirts of hills, and it never hurries the feet that trust it. Along its verges grow the ordinary saints of travel. Plantain tough as old leather, yarrow with its careful lace, wild thyme bringing a meadow's whisper to a weary mouth. I have watched this road through many twilights. I have seen it welcome those who carry vows like small, warm birds against their chests. They do not march. They amble, they pause. They lean upon staves polished by older palms. Some wear shells that flash a discreet C at their throats. Some stitch badges of tin to their cloaks. Stamped with chapels, they have met the way a thirsty man meets springs. Their packs are light with the wisdom of distance. Bread wrapped in cloth, a knife honest enough to speak of many duties, a scrap of wool to lay beneath the head when turf or barn sill serves for pillow. Every pack holds something hopeful. A ribbon meant for a relic, a token to lay upon a stone, a line of prayer folded and unfolded until the crease becomes a kind of rosary. Villages have learned the old hospitality again. A bench beneath an ash tree offers the comfort of wood that has stored noon. A cottage door stands open on purpose, not for gossip, but for the quiet business of welcome. Water is drawn and given without question. A child runs to fetch apples with the air of a clerk accomplishing a serious task. In church porches at dusk, travelers sit shoulder to shoulder, and bread goes round with that beautiful arithmetic by which half a loaf becomes enough for many mouths. There is always a story, of a lane that floods after heavy rain, of a bridge mended at last, of a shrine ahead where candles burn with a steadiness that seems to instruct the wind. No one asks the pilgrims to explain themselves. The road explains, and that is sufficient. Grief walks there without disguise, but it no longer staggers. It has learned a better gait. Gratitude walks there, not in trumpets, but in the small decision to stop and tie up a traveler's loosened shoe. And hope is the most ordinary pilgrim of all, recognized by the way it looks at every gate as if it might open. I have followed a woman who promised a saint a song for the sake of her sister's health, and she hums that song mile by mile, letting it keep the rhythm of her steps. I have watched a man carry a crooked piece of wood that he intends to lay upon an altar, a joke between him and heaven about a temper he is learning to straighten. I have seen children taught by the road's gentle courtesy to accept the world as a place where strangers may pour water for them and ask about their journey as a way of asking about their souls. At last, the pilgrim reaches the place of intention. It is not always lofty. Sometimes it is a stone warmed by many hands, sometimes a window where glass remembers the day a certain sorrow eased. Knees touch flagstone. Foreheads come near to wood polished by 1,000 small bows. Coins ring once and lie still. There is no bargaining here, only a setting down. And when the pilgrim rises, what has been given stays given. The road, patient as a good listener, waits outside, ready to walk them home by a path that now knows their name. In a street that smells of soap and steam, I pause beside a low door with a sprig of rosemary hung above it, a sign to those who have learned the language of leaves. Within, the healer's bench keeps its modest court. It is scarred in the reassuring way of useful things. Upon it stand jars with shy labels, angelica, betony, hyssop, rue, and a mortar whose rim is made soft by the patience of grinding. A lamp burns steadily, its flame the color of advice. Here, medicine is a braid. One strand is leaf and root, flower and seed, their temper known by long acquaintance and small experiments repeated until they become a household science. Another strand is craft, linen kept truly clean, water boiled until it speaks of safety, knives sharpened to work without anger. The third strand is manner, a voice kept low so that fear cannot borrow it, a touch that measures without trespass, the kind of listening that allows pain to name itself fully and thus begin to loosen. People come not as cases, but as neighbors. A fisherman brings a knee that has argued too often with a boat's thwart. He leaves with a poultice that smells of earth and a promise to rest that surprises him by sounding like permission. A seamstress, eyes pricked by too much candle, is shown how to drop work at dusk and walk beneath trees so that green can wash the fret from sight. A child is measured for fever and then given a story alongside willow bark tea, for stories, too, have their salicylic virtues when they are told with care. There are other healers who keep different rooms. The barber with his basin and his blades, whose leeches look like small commas as if ready to pause the blood sentence. He has learned to cover his sharpness with courtesy and to set down his pride like a dangerous instrument when faced with what he does not know. The physician in his robe, whose books remember Greece and gardens of the East. He prescribes more lightly now, more humanly, as though he has listened at last to the language of convalescence, which is essentially the language of time. I have seen them confer at corners in a market. The apothecary with her stained fingers, the barber with his careful gaze, the doctor with his Latin like a respectful cloak. They speak of a child's cough, of a wound that will not decide whether to close, of a woman whose grief presses too hard upon her chest. Advice is given and taken. Pride is swallowed in sips. The bench does not belong to any single hand. It belongs to the village or the ward, and the work upon it is a sacrament of the ordinary, performed in aprons that catch the day's true stains. Beyond the harbor, where water keeps its own slow counsel, lie the island houses of compassion. They are simple things, whitewashed walls, roofs that speak straw to the sun, doors that love air so much they are rarely shut. A bell hangs beneath a sheltering eave and tells the hours as gently as a mother who will not wake a sleeping child. Boats come and go without fuss. Oars are dipped in a manner that suggests both respect and skill. Those who arrive are met with linen that has remembered the sun, with broth that remembers the bones it borrowed from, with beds that accept bodies without inquiry. Here, the rules are the rules of decency. Wash, rest, drink, breathe. Windows are open to sea and sky unless weather insists otherwise, and even then the shutters blink kindly, as though assuring the wind it will be welcomed back. The keepers of these houses have learned a choreography of ease. Floors are scrubbed until wood remembers spring. Sheets are lifted and smoothed in a dance that makes order out of the world's rougher patterns. Stools are placed where view and comfort are best friends. The sick and the worried are taught to look outward, toward gulls that know how to glide without a wasted motion, toward a horizon that holds all questions calmly. Some shelters are for travelers who must wait their counted days before they may re-enter the city's careful embrace. They write letters in firm hands to wives and sons, to husbands and mothers, and find that the writing cures a certain fever in the mind. Others are for those whose bodies ask for a longer kindness. Bone knitters, breath bringers, watchers of night who know how to lend their own calm to a restless hour. They speak little. They hum, perhaps, the way a kettle hums just before it is ready to pour. When the bell calls, it is for prayer that is more posture than speech. A standing together at windows, a settling of shoulders, a recognition that healing is something we permit as much as something we manufacture. On certain evenings, the keeper carries a lamp along the path outside so that passing boats may think. There is a place where warmth is awake if we need it. And the tide, with its old authority, keeps time for the whole house, washing its worries and returning them only when they have become manageable, like shells. There are rooms where thought learns to sit up straight. I pass one now, and the door is ajar. Inside, candles stand like a small orchard, each wick a patient fruit. The tables are nicked by generations of elbows. Margins are wide as fields, waiting for crops of careful notes. At the front sits a scholar who has learned to balance certainty with wonder, and in his hand a feather that makes its own weather along the page. The students are a country unto themselves. Sons of cobblers with their cuffs shined by effort, daughters of merchants with eyes that miss nothing, clerics in training who carry silence as if it were a textbook too. They argue in a tone that respects the object of their argument, even when it is slippery. Words from distant ages are invited in and asked to speak slowly. A sentence from a church father takes off its heavy cloak and reveals its nimble ankles. A line of Aristotle is warmed at the fire until it yields its late winter flavor. A saint and a philosopher are seated at one table and told they must share the bread. Copyists nearby keep the world from fading. They rule lines as straight as conscience. They breathe regularly so that their letters will not quaver. When the master's voice rises to quote something tender or severe, Their quills pause above the parchment like a flock of starlings arrested by wind. Then the lesson is folded into the margin, an asterisk like a star to remember where the good was found. Outside the schools, learning takes humbler rooms. A parish clerk teaches children their letters by means of chalk and patience. Numbers are introduced as if they were shy visitors. They are not forced to sing before they have learned to carry a melody. In workshops, laws of proportion are discovered not only in cathedrals but in stools that do not wobble. A cook explains the alchemy of leaven with more clarity than any treatise. A shepherd parses weather better than a senator. The lamps are everywhere, and night cannot keep its hold. When clouds thin to gauze and air turns to glass, I lie upon a hill and let the sky explain itself. The old scholars still lift their instruments toward the wanderers and the fixed, charting paths with humility. Yet the ordinary folk read the heavens too, and their almanacs are stitched with the thread of experience. They name the saints of frost and rain. They remember when a comet once braided fear into the year and how that fear unraveled with the simple endurance of everyday bread. Astrologers take the hands of noblemen and washerwomen alike and trace meaning along the map of their palms. They do not pretend to know the plots of all tomorrows. They suggest dispositions, whether within character, the likeliest hours for sowing hope or harvesting courage. The advice is never a chain. It is a hedge trimmed to guide, not to imprison. People leave their tables and speak to the moon anyway, because she has a better bedside manner than most philosophers. Calendars become common treasure. On their pages, saints keep company with sowing days. Eclipses crouch like cats beneath the furniture of the year. In winter, when nights master the afternoon easily, families take the constellations into their mouths as stories. The hunter becomes a parable about pride learning to use itself well. The small dog turns into a tale about fidelity following even to the end of the lane. Children fall asleep before the last star is named, and the rest are promised for tomorrow. When strange lights appear, as they sometimes do, the city neither panics nor yawns. Bells are not rung as for invasion, nor are shutters banged shut. People step outside and look up together. They say each other's names softly in the dark, and that practice, all by itself, interprets the omen for the good. There is a moment in every age when fear sharpens its knives and looks around for a back to test them upon. I have stood in squares where rumor grew teeth. I have watched it knock upon doors belonging to those whose prayers were shaped differently, whose customs stood like unfamiliar trees. I have seen hands reach for stones, words reach for venom, eyes narrow until they forgot how to recognize a neighbor. Then, also, I have seen mercy put on its cloak and walk into the middle of the square. A priest climbed down from his sermon and stood beside a merchant who kept holy days on another calendar. Together they carried a table out and began to ladle soup as if hunger were the only meaningful creed. A midwife spoke up in a voice that had delivered half the town, saying that to slander a people was to endanger its children and therefore everyone's future. A reeve found his courage and declared that law is not a cudgel but a fence meant to keep wolves out, not lambs in. It is slow work, this unlearning of cruelty. It requires many small tasks. The writing of letters that say plainly what cannot be tolerated. The keeping of watch not to hunt, but to protect. The inviting of strangers to tell their stories at tables where salt is shared. Ballads that once savored the spice of scapegoats begin to taste dull. New songs rise, modest as oatmeal, and prove more nourishing. Sometimes apology arrives late, like a traveler delayed by snow. Still, it arrives. Candles are lit not only for the village's own, but for those it wronged. Names are set upon lips with care so that they will not be lost. Children are taught that cruelty is a lazy form of certainty, and that the world deserves better from them. They nod solemnly, and then go outside to play in mixed company without understanding how holy a thing they enact. Mercy is not weakness here. It is the strong back that carries the day home unbroken. It is the shield set between rumor and the defenseless. It is the decision, renewed like bread, to live as though tomorrow will ask us what we did with our fear and expect an answer that honors our humanity. Night sometimes reopens old rooms. I sit by a hearth where a child wakes from a dream that spilled too much darkness. The grandmother does not scold sleep for its mischief. She picks up a song the way one picks up a shawl and wraps the child in it. The melody is simple as breath, the words as plain as milk. It names good things deliberately: cat and kettle, loaf and lamplight, father's step and mother's hand. In this naming, shadows shrink to their proper size. Charms have their place, though the wise do not confuse charm with command. A sprig of rowan is tied above the cradle, not as a magician's boast, but as a reminder that the world is full of friendly patterns. A woolen thread, knotted a certain way, becomes a rosary of reassurance passing from fingertip to fingertip. A story is told, one the child knows by heart, and still it works. A small creature finds its way home because everyone it meets helped a little rather than asking for a coin. For older hearts, lullabies change form but not purpose. A baker recites the order in which he sets his loaves in the oven, and the incidental poetry of that litany calms him. A widow counts, not the years since goodbye, but the kindnesses that still visit, and she sleeps the better for it. A watchman hums the notes of bells he expects to hear before dawn and walks the city as if keeping time were a prayer. The great fear that the plague left behind is sung to sleep in these houses, night after night, until it learns better manners. It is not banished by heroics. It is folded into a larger quiet made of tune and touch and talk. By morning, even the boards seem kinder underfoot, as if the lullaby traveled through wood as well as air and taught the floor a gentler creak. I enter a churchyard where grief has chosen to plant rather than to rage. The paths curve like sentences softened by revision. Along them, rosemary lifts its evergreen hands in prayer, and rue keeps company with its delicate blue regard. Yew trees stand not as threats but as guardians who have learned to smile. Here, memory is tended with tools that do not wound. A rake that redistributes fallen light, a trowel that believes in bulbs. Families come in all weathers. They weed not to erase, but to make space for seeds. The names upon stones are traced by children who cannot yet read and by elders who know each letter's personality. A bench is placed where afternoon learns to rest. On certain days, a pie is eaten beneath the oldest yew, and the crumbs are offered without guilt to birds who understand the sacrament of sharing. Within the church, small chapels have been raised where candles remember individual faces. They are not grand. They do not pretend to buy favors from heaven. They are simply hearths for the absent. A string of prayers hangs nearby, written by hands that differ in their elegance and in their grammar but not in their love. Some are barely more than names. Others are little poems, the kind that life composes for those who watch it closely. He loved to whistle upon rising. She knew where to find water in dry summers. He could carry a sheep and a laugh at the same time. Beyond the wall, in gardens kept for the living, remembrance continues in the ordinary work of keeping beans trellised and roses pruned. A widower maintains the path by which his wife once walked to fetch time, and he finds that his feet remember her steps even when his mind falters. A child plants a tree on the day she learns to braid. Each year the braid and the branches become more assured. There is no monument here larger than usefulness or lovelier than a well-watered bed. Remembrance, done this way, is not a stone tied to the ankle. It is a key kept in the pocket. It opens the door between sorrow and sweetness and lets them pass through each other until they can no longer quarrel. The age after disaster learns invention the way a field learns clover. Quietly, insistently, with a sweetness noticed first by bees and then by those who follow their example. I walk along a stream and come upon a mill whose wheel turns with the poise of a practiced dancer. Its paddles sip the water, never gulping. Inside, gears made by clever hands take one force and give it another shape. Grain becomes flour while a boy, leaning on a broom, learns that power is only holy when it is harnessed with humility. Elsewhere, wind plays the engineer. A hill grown used to stillness now wears a moving crown. The veins clack and sigh, and below them sacks swell with the breath of bread to be. In towns, looms grow broader and more ambitious while still respecting the pace of fingers. Fulling mills keep beating cloth into comradeship, water and wood conferring without quarrel. In farmyards, plows try new angles and find the soil willing to meet them. Horses wear collars that spare their throats and honor their lungs, and their grateful exhalations steam the morning like incense. Learning itself is seated in new furrows. Monasteries that once copied only what was already cherished now turn pages to the future. They catalog herbs as if inventing an alphabet. They write down weather as though the sky were a correspondent to be answered kindly. Merchants teach arithmetic to their daughters, who teach it to sons not their own when trade requires two heads instead of one. A mason's apprentice draws a circle upon a slate and discovers a geometry that will keep a tower from regretting its ambition. These seeds do not sprout trumpets. They sprout better handles on buckets, benches that do not wobble, calendars that fit the work rather than the other way around. They sprout oaths that include fairer wages, markets that prefer honest weights, guilds that admit skill from unexpected quarters because hunger has taught them to love competence more than custom. From time to time, a new thought steps into the square, blinking. It is escorted politely to the edge of town and asked to walk beside the river a while to see whether it can keep a steady pace. It does. It returns tamed but not diminished, and sets about helping with the laundry of reality. That is how progress behaves in this age, not as a trumpet in a throne room, but as a neighbor with rolled-up sleeves. Night gathers the town into a single listening ear. Lanterns bloom along the lanes like rare flowers that open only when the day has gone to roost. In the hall, a long table becomes longer with every chair pulled close. The people come not to shout, but to promise. There is parchment, yes, and a pen that knows the feel of solemnity. But first there is bread and salt, and the taste of both reminds the tongue that oaths must feed the hungry and keep the water sweet, or else they do not deserve their syllables. The covenant is simple. It is built of verbs that have worn the test of use. To keep, to mend, to share, to refuse cruelty, to honor labor, to welcome travelers, to protect the word given in the daylight and the sleeper who must trust the hill above his house to stay where the hill has always stayed. It does not attempt to police hearts. It only asks hands to behave and voices to stay within the music. They sign. Some with flourish, most with care, a few with marks that learned their shape this very evening. A child is lifted and allowed to draw a line, and laughter travels the room like a swallow before it returns to its perch. Then the parchment is rolled and ribboned and placed where the church's quiet keeps it safer than any lock could. But the true covenant is outside. I walk with them as they disperse by lanes that now look like streams of small constellations. A watchman makes his rounds not as a warden but as a steward. He touches each door gently with his staff, and would answers with a note that says, "Present, present, present." Somewhere a cat is coaxed from a roof with the last milk of the day. Somewhere a quarrel is postponed until morning can mediate. Somewhere a woman who fears sleeplessness hears the feet of friends pass by and falls asleep because community has learned to keep time together. Midnight places its cool hand upon the city's brow. The bells decline to count these hours. They let silence do the honors. In that silence, I hear what oaths sound like when they have gone to work. No more than the soft industry of a breathing town, the whisper of wheat in a storeroom, the well being covered against the mischief of night, the river telling its long story to the pilings that have learned to listen. So the age after the great shadow keeps faith with itself. By walking, by tending, by learning, by forgiving, by inventing and remembering in the same breath. It is not a golden time, but it is a mending one which is nobler. The road still waits. The bench still serves, the island houses still shine like low stars, the schools still coax lamps into thought, the sky still offers its quiet curriculum, the gardens still make grief fragrant, and the covenants still hold, even when no one is watching. I walk to the foundry where yesterday's fear learned a new voice. In a trough black with old labor, bell metal sleeps, and then wakes under flame. The bell that once tolled for plague, grim and relentless, is melted with care and poured into a fresh mold that bears the names of children born since the sorrow. When it is lifted free, sand falling like quiet rain, the bell gleams the color of dawn on wet stone. They swing it first in the yard. This note is round, forgiving. I have heard bells call armies and count judgments. This one calls windows to open. In the streets below, shutters are pushed wide the width of a palm, as habit now insists. Air must move. Light must enter. Brooms whisper along cobbles. Water arcs bright and clean into gutters. And the watchman's staff taps each well cover like a blessing learned in hard years. These are the rites the plague left behind, small obediences that keep breath honest. The bell is raised to its beam and given the city's trust. It will bless bread at dawn and marriages at noon. It will steady hands when harvest waits on weather. And at evening it will remind even the weary to air the rooms, to wash the handles, to leave a sliver of window for the moon. Metal once shaped for endings now keeps beginnings. I stand beneath its sound and feel how survival became custom, how custom became care, and how care, wrung daily, becomes a peace that does not boast. Out beyond the quay, the little island where counting once kept sorrow at a distance has grown green with gratitude. I take the narrow path between low walls whiter than shells. Here, the houses that taught patience now teach cultivation. Beds of rosemary and rue warm their shoulders in the sun. Against a sheltered wall, figs spread their clever hands. In southern ports, tubs of lemon and bitter orange roll indoors when winds turn stern and out again when they soften. The old keeper laughs that he now measures health in leaves. I watch a woman who once waited her measured days return with a spade and a child. She shows the boy how soil remembers kindness, how water given at the right hour prevents both worry and waste. The plague taught us air and light, she says softly. So we planted both. The child learns to crush time between finger and thumb and lift the scent to his face like a lesson. He learns the calendar of windows. Shutters wide at morning, half-latched at noon, linen aired, blankets swung across rails so the sun can write its advice upon them. Sailors still come ashore and leave letters in a box that smells of salt and beeswax. They carry away cuttings wrapped in damp rag, little passports of green. Mint for a ship's broth, sage for a sore throat when the sea grows argumentative. The keeper keeps notes, what thrives, what sulks, what refuses to be hurried. These notes are copied in town, pinned near bakehouse doors, read by midwives and reeves and apothecaries who have learned that the island's calm is not isolation but instruction. Once it measured danger by days, now it measures well-being by growth. I stand where sea meets leaf and think how prudence, once a fence, became a garden gate. Night gathers, and the hall's parchment rests with its ribbon sleeping like a tame flame. I walk the lanes to see if oaths have found their shoes. At the mill, the wheel turns with the humility of power used well. The miller weighs fairly, remembering the season when hunger made the village thin as a reed. In the green, a steward greets a widow by name and takes her rent in coin, not in days ripped from her own field. The price of hands, once whispered like a hope, is spoken plainly now, and work begins with water poured over fingers, not because ritual is pretty, but because cleanliness and consent have become the two hinges of the door. In the stubble after harvest, gleaners move like a soft tide, bending, rising, bending again. No one chases them away. The charter's spirit is there among the stalks, that no belly shall learn the old emptiness if the village can prevent it. At market, a girl counts change without fear of laughter. She learns sums beside her mother's spinning, and the merchant nods at her arithmetic as if he were watching a field turn green. The guild mark pressed into a bolt of cloth is a signature of truth, and truth travels from hand to hand with the same ease as bread. I pause by a doorway where a new father lifts a latch with the careful hand of one who has vowed to keep thresholds honest. Behind him, a small cry begins the world again. The bell we heard earlier answers, not loudly, but with that round note made from melted sorrow. Windows stand open a finger's width. The broom leans ready. The night watch passes and touches the gatepost lightly, and would replies in the key of promise. I have seen empires learn little from calamity. This village learned much. It keeps its learning in ordinary acts. Rinsed basins, fair tallies, shared gleanings, doors that open for air and for need. And because such acts are repeated, sleep returns without argument, and morning comes to a house that has already remembered how to be kind. Rest now, traveler of hours. When you wake, we may return to the hill we began upon, and gather the whole journey into a small, steady warmth. The night will keep you until then, and I, who have watched and will watch, keep you also in remembrance.